Thanks so much. I'm super excited to be here. I love talking about mycotoxins. I love talking about organic acids. Biochemistry is my jam. I'm also really excited to see a lot of you in the chat or say, yeah, I'm not really familiar with mycotoxins because I feel like it's such overwhelming, right? Because you hear like all these experts talking about it and they've got these patients who are just so sick and they can't even sit upright for your entire interview with them. Is wow, how do you even start with a patient like that? Really, what we're going to be doing today is helping you feel confident in ordering and looking for those mycotoxin tests and being able to start recognizing that in your patient population. Because I think we all know you do your basics and roughly 78% of your patients are going to get better. But what do you do about those ones who are still inflamed, who are still sick? And so I want to help just give you some more tools and ways to assess who those patients are going to be. And then what are some really reasonable ways to start in on them and put together a non overwhelming, but super personalized and super supportive plan for them. So that's me how we're diving in today. So starting with mycotoxins, as you all probably, whoa, been crazy there. As you all probably know, myco means fungi. So we're thinking about mold. So throughout the presentation, I'm probably going to use mold and mycotoxin somewhat interchangeably. They're definitely not the same thing, of course, because mycotoxins are something that your molds produce. There's over 300 species of fungus that produce mycotoxins, and there's a lot out there. But again, I always say mold because it's way easier to say. It's a way catchier term. That's what patients hone in on. So that's kind of what we're looking. So your mycotoxins are going to be a type of secondary metabolite. So they're not essential for the mold survival, but there's something they're going to be making. I always think of them as being the plant analog would be something like essential oils. So your plants are making sesquiterpenes and all those other sorts of cool products that they don't really need to survive, but they do things for the plant. They give them a survival advantage. We think mycotoxins are pretty much the same deal. So for instance, everybody loves the example of penicillin, so I'm going to use that one too. Penicillin, our first antibiotic, it's made by Penicillium, the mold. And it's a really neat one because it basically blocks bacteria from invading into that mold space. So the mold basically has priority on all the resources in that space. So that's a very obvious example where a secondary metabolite made by a mold confers a survival advantage. The trick is we have no idea why the mycotoxins confer survival advantages. There's been some theories about how maybe mycotoxins prevent other things from eating moldy foods and they're more likely to leave it alone. Maybe, but I'm definitely that person who just picks the mold off the bread and still eats it. So I'm not sure about that. But so a lot of those secondary metabolites, and that's really what we're looking at. When you think about mycotoxins, you want to put them in your brain, put them in the same category as VOCs. And what I mean by that is your VOCs, your volatile organic compounds, they're super lightweight. They aerosolize. So your main route of exposures be through inhalation. And they're really good at getting places in your body. They can be stored in adipose. They can be really hard for some people to process out. It turns out that mycotoxins are fairly similar in their volatility. They're very similar in the way that they can get into all your different cells and have a spectrum of impact across the body. Now, when we think about mycotoxins, they can travel on mold spores, they can travel in the air, and it's very similar again to your volatile organic compounds where, hey, so like something like plastic off-gassing, that's a classic example of a volatile organic compound. You smell that plastic smell, those are your VOCs. You're going to be inhaling that. So very similar kind of in that regard. So here's a list of some of our most common, oh, why does it keep doing that to me? So our most common toxigenic fungi. So I just have 4 listed here. So starting with Aspergillus, this is a really common species of mold. Most people know Aspergillus because it is one of the few fungi that cause human pathology. So aspergillosis caused by Aspergillus. This guy makes aflatoxin, which we tend to think of as the worst of the mycotoxins. There's only a couple species of Aspergillus that actually make it. I think two, and there's like 50 species of Aspergillus. So just because you have mold doesn't mean you have mycotoxins. Generally, we think that your molds are going to start making mycotoxins when they get a trigger. So the right sort of circumstances, environmental circumstances. So for Aspergillus, we think this is a hot and humid environment. So that just makes me think of bathrooms, right? You take a hot shower, it's gonna be hot and humid. So poor ventilation, that's one of those classic sorts of situations. This is actually even maybe more commonly a food crop contaminant. And so the food crops we're thinking of here would be your grains. Penicillium is a fabulous mold. This guy will grow on anything. I love it because it's responsible for making blue cheese, which I know it's a polarizing thing, but I love blue cheese. So I love penicillium. So that's pretty interesting about this guy. This is going to be your most common food mold. So, like when you leave a bowl of fruit on the counter and you've got a bunch of clementines in there and one of them starts molding, it's kind of like that blue-green mold on the outside, probably penicillium that you're looking at. This guy will also grow on literally anything like ceiling tiles. So it's very commonly seen in buildings, growing on building material. It's really good at growing. Its Achilles heel, though, is cold. It hates cold, which is why you refrigerate food to stop molding because penicillium won't grow. Fun thing about this mold is that it can make ochratoxin, which is probably our second least favorite mycotoxin. Fusarium is another one of your common grain ones. So that one you can think food for any of these, but you can also think environmental for any of these. I hope you guys are noticing that pattern at this point. Hey, the third time foods come up out of your your four mold types. Yeah. So that can be really tricky about molds. So keep in mind as we go through this, yeah, that's normally where you see them, but it could be either place. So common grain crop contaminant. This one causes billions of dollars in crop losses. And this group is known for making trichothysines. Trichothysines is a category of mycotoxins, and there are tons of subtoxins underneath that. They're all just variations on a theme. So they've got a tricyclic sort of aromatic center, and then they're going to put different molecules on that to modify it. It's a really big group there. And then the last one we have is Stachyboitres. Stachyboitres, or Stacky, I like to call it Stacky because it's cute. That's your classic black mold. That's the one that everybody thinks about. Oh, yeah, it was in the middle of the night and there's a big rainstorm and a tree fell on my house and there was a hole in the attic and everything got wet. And then it was all moldy within the week and everybody got sick. That's like your classic Stacky. It's one of the least common mold, but it's definitely one of the most famous molds because it makes you so sick and it's just so gross. This guy loves cellulose. It will grow on any plant material. So cellulose, you can think about wood. That's obviously largely cellulose. Your plant fibers, even things like linens or cotton, Stacky will grow on that. And Stacky is known for making trichothysines. So again, a big group of different types of mycotoxins. So when you're thinking you're working with a patient, okay, how do I know who's got mold and who doesn't and who do I need to worry about? There's a couple ways you can approach this. What I like to do is I like to just pad my interview and my initial intake with some questions. I had to learn the hard way by missing several mold patients that it's really important to have a high level of clinical suspicion for mold because it's going to be hard to pick up otherwise. So as was mentioned, I went to school in Portland, Oregon. So my first environmental medicine shift in the clinic, we had this patient and she was really sick. And one of her hallmark symptoms was she had easy susceptibility to static shock, which now I know is a classic mold symptom. But at the time I had no idea. But we were living in Portland, Oregon. Instead of looking, she was a veteran, so we were looking for like environmental toxins, like the big bad stuff. But instead of going for the rare things that happened like 15 years ago when she was in the service, we should have just been looking for mold because now in retrospect, she had all of it. So if you don't look for it and you don't ask those questions, you're not going to find it. And that's going to be that 20% of patients you're like, didn't really help you. Okay, so the questions. Have you recently moved? And a question like this is not just related to, okay, did you move recently, but how does that correlate with your symptoms? So you're looking for, okay, did you move 5 years ago and all your symptoms started 4.5 years ago and it was a gradual onset? Ooh, that's a pretty good sort of correlation that you're like, the timing is perfect. There might be an environmental component here. You also want to think about new cars, new office buildings, new to them, because those sorts of things can also be environmental exposures. If you think about how often you're in your car, 30 minutes every day, that adds up on you, or how much time you spent at your office. Hopefully it's not more than 8 hours, 5 days a week, but maybe it is. So all of those things can be really helpful for understanding if there's an environmental component. Is your home a new build or an older home? I kind of love and hate this question because all my patients who are in a new build, they're like, our home's brand new. There's no way there's mold. I'm like, you don't know that for sure because sometimes they build houses and it's raining and then all of the framing gets wet and the framing's all wood. And then they put the sheathing on if they're slab, but they didn't wait for it to dry or they're hoping it dries from the inside out. I don't know about that. And then there's whole YouTube channel dedicated to contractors who go through, or I get home inspectors who go through new builds and point out everything that's not to code, not right. So like you can't hang your hat on that. However, generally an older home is going to be more likely to be a culprit than a new build because the older it house is, the more likely it is to have had water damage in the past and things break. So HVAC systems break, your water softener goes out and dumps a ton of water. And then you have to think about houses that were built a while ago. The plumbing was all different. So this ties into number three, plumbing issues. So new houses have copper pipes to take the water to the faucets, and then they've got PVC that carries it away. Old houses have copper to take it to the faucet. They have cast iron to take it away. Cast iron rots from the inside out. And so it looks fine on the outside, but it's rotting and getting thin. And now it's condensating and now it has a slow drip. And that's all behind a wall. So you don't see it. And all of a sudden, there's a moldy house issue that you had no idea. So plumbing issues beyond just, yeah, my kitchen sink leaks can be a little bit more insidious, but digging into that and asking them can be really helpful. Number four, AC. Any HVAC system is at risk, especially air conditioning. When you condition the air, you're also pulling moisture out of it, and moisture tends to collect. You're looking for condensation. And of course, it's an HVAC system, so you're running air through air carried particulate. Particulate is made of organic matter. So you're basically combining the condensations of water and particulate and making mud for the mold to grow on. So that can be in the house, but keep in mind that could also be, of course, the workplace, but your car could also be a culprit here. I remember in residency, my residency director talked about a patient who had mycotoxin poisoning from her car because there was an issue with the way it was, I guess, not plumbed, tubed for the air conditioning. And every time she was in her car, she noticed feeling way worse. And that ended up being her culprit, was the car air conditioning. Number five is related to diet. So some foods are moldier than others. As we saw earlier, a lot of those mold species are going to basically attack grain crops. And so your grains are naturally going to be higher in molds than your not grains. Like potatoes, even though they grow in the dirt, they tend to be lower in mold. And so that's something you can think about. Wow, this patient switched to a vegan diet and they were supplementing properly and they're eating a lot of grains and they feel way worse than they were eating like a normal or kind of healthy American diet. Maybe it's not the macros, maybe it's the mold content within that diet. So that's always something we can think about. We can also think about foods that are tropical. I always list coffee because I love making people stop drinking coffee. Nobody needs that caffeine if their adrenals are good. But the other thing about coffee is that they pick the coffee fruit and then they've got to get the fruit off the bean. There's two ways to do that. You either water blast it off or traditionally you ferment it off. And fermenting is naturally going to be more moldy. Or we'll see later, fermented foods cause an aggravation. So if you see things like that, you're going to want to think about, oh, maybe there's a mold issue. It might not be the food itself. It might be the mold on the food. And then the last thing you want to be aware of is your patient's surrounds. Where do they live? I read all the water. I'm a total dork. So I read all the water quality reports around my area because I want to know what my patients are getting exposed to. We've got a lot of area where I am in Wisconsin where there's springs, there's rivers, we've got lots of lakes. And so there's a lot of kind of standing water. So I've had a moldy patient who she had a spring in her backyard. I'm like, oh, that probably raises the water table and means your basement's wet all the time, huh? So you want to know those sorts of things. So just beyond flooding and like in one instance of water damage, do we have a reason to suspect there's that chronic moisture issue? So those can be things that you start thinking about. You don't have to ask every single patient this, but if you got one of those patients, you're like, ooh, there's something going on here and I'm not exactly sure what it is. These are the sorts of questions, the sorts of things you want to start thinking about to really do that dive and evaluate mycotoxins before you even do any sort of testing. Symptom wise, oh, so symptoms of mycotoxins are wildly vague and totally unhelpful. So there's a couple that like definitely stand out. Literally anything could cause any one of these symptoms we have listed. Like fatigue is your number one most common symptom for mycotoxin poisoning, but I would bet $5 that's probably the number one most common symptom that you treat in your practice anyway. So it's like, that's not very helpful. So what we're looking for here is not any one symptom. We're looking for the accumulation of symptoms or we're looking for the severity. So fatigue, plus they get migraines that are not associated with their menstrual cycle. And they have a lot of bloating that doesn't respond to diet changes and they hurt everywhere. Ooh. Now we're starting to think there might be something big and bad inflammatory. Now is when we can really start thinking about mycotoxins. You can also think about how much their fatigue impacts them. So any one of these symptoms, anybody could be fatigued, but like how many times we talk to a patient, and there's like a 6 out of 10. I get a crash in the afternoon. Yeah, I'm tired, but I power through. That's not that bad. But sometimes you have patients who are like, yeah, I sleep for 10 hours a night and I take a nap every afternoon. It's, whoa. Now that's fatigue. And so that's going to be a higher level of severity. That's when we start thinking it's not just adrenal fatigue or adrenal imbalance or thyroid. Now we're starting to think, oh, there's some big inflammation going on there. And so that's me one of those ways that you can use the symptom picture to expand out what you've already asked them and putting that picture together of, okay, what's going on with this patient? So when we think about mycotoxins and why do they cause the symptoms they cause, a lot of, and if you look at mycotoxins, the number one thing they do is they really impact the immune system. Some of them specifically slow down, for instance, your white blood cell motility. So they're not able to diapedese as well. Don't you love that word? They can't get to where they need to go to fight infections. Maybe that helps mold have new places to infect. And so when we think about immune suppression, I don't know about you guys, but I think about immunosuppressant drugs. This is going to be a little bit harder to pick up on than that. So classically, a lot of your mycotoxins like ocotoxin or aflatoxin, like it can cause cancer. Yes, it can. But if you're waiting to see cancer in your patient, you're probably too late to help them with their mycotoxins. Like you missed it. So we're looking for more subtle immune system impairment here. So one of the easiest ones to look for and that we all might think about is how often you get sick. Is it once a month, all winter? Oof, that's way too much. And keep in mind, your patrons are going to want to make excuses for that. Oh, my kids are in daycare, or oh, I was stressed that month. Fine, but then what about the month before that and the month before that? And they've been in daycare for 3 years now. You have to have a high level of suspicion there because that's one area of the immune system a lot of people write off. But getting sick easily or staying sick for way longer, like everybody else got the cold, they're done in 3 days, and you took a week to recover. Ooh, that tells me you've got something going on with your immune system. So we're looking for things like that. You can also look for recovery. So I love to ask patients, hey, do you exercise? Yeah, I exercise. How does it feel when you're done? Do you push yourself? And like, how long do you get sore? How long is that soreness sticking around? If they're sore for 3 days, either their diet's not adequate or they're inflamed and they can't actually heal. You need your immune system to heal because every time you exercise, you're ripping tissues apart. You got to be able to rebuild them. You can also, I work with the chiropractor, so I always think about, all right, are we seeing repeat injuries that are inflammatory in nature, like tendonitis, bursitis, plantar fasciitis, where you're just always chasing one pain after the other, but you're never completely well? That would be another sign of immune system impairment. That's me a sign of there's something going on more underlying with inflammation beyond just, oh, you're unlucky and you got plantar fasciitis. The other big thing you can look for is mycotoxins' impact on cognition. So that would be probably, along with fatigue, the other most common symptom with mycotoxins. And there's a bunch of data here you can read through on your own. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about which patient. So brain fog is a subjective measure, right? And so everybody experiences that a little differently. And a lot of people just say, I have trouble thinking, so they call it brain fog. But you want to differentiate the squirrel brain from the slow brain. That the slow brain is your true brain fog. Like squirrel brain, you know that. That's your classic ADHD. She's 45 years old, perimenopausal, and she's super stressed and anxious kind of about her kids. And she's like here and there and everywhere. And you're like, wow, I got to really guide you through this interview. And she's, oh yeah, I do 20 things all at the same time. And multitasking, your brain is all over the place. And that's one type of focus impairment. But what we're looking at is the like, oh yeah, it takes me 5 times to read a page. And then I finally get that information dialed in, or it's there and then it's gone within 20 minutes. Or like in your students or your younger patients, they might have to take a really long time to get ready for a test. And they have to study for hours compared to their friends. Or they might show up to the test like, I never read the page, but like nothing will come out of their head. That would be signs of this style of brain fog. The other thing you might see for mycotoxins and impact on the brain is going to be new onset mental health. I've definitely seen that with mycotoxins. I was actually a patient. He was a younger guy. He must have been like 22. And he moved into his grandmother's basement to pay. So he was going to pay her rent, which she needed. And he could help her with things around the house. But living in her basement apparently was full of mold. And he had sudden onset depression. So he was tired, low motivation, just like really low mood. And it very strongly correlated with him moving into his grandmother's basement. And that was a pretty easy one to catch. But that was his main presentation. It was just the fatigue and the new onset mental health issue for no apparent reason. And so that's how strongly mycotoxins generally impact the brain. So let's say that you went to your interview, you're like, ooh, this patient's decent. The patient's decently sick. There's going to be maybe some of those signs like they're fatigued. They definitely have some brain fog. So now you want to sort through, do you want to test them? And what exactly are you testing for? So when we're thinking about testing for mycotoxin, that is not interchangeable with environmental molds. So remember, not all mold. In fact, the vast majority of mold does not make mycotoxins. And so, yes, you can test the environment and see if it's moldy. And if you're worried about a mold allergy, that might make sense. You would probably also want to do an environmental allergen panel and specifically see if they're allergic to mold. But if we're worried about mycotoxins, you want to really test the patient's body and see what they're exposed to before you start testing the environment. And the reason, again, is that just because there's mold there doesn't mean there's mycotoxins. So that's the first thing you want to think about. Second thing is, okay, do we have a reasonable suspicion that there's mold somewhere? So, like I talked about, yeah, you're living in a basement, you're in a wet area, there is a history of water damage, all those things like, yeah, there's mold in your bathroom, just test. It's definitely worth ruling it out. It's going to save you a lot of headache to just make sure that it's not there. And most of the time, patients are super relieved to know they don't have to deal with mycotoxins when it comes up being negative. Food exposure, if there's an obvious sign that diet, like, yeah, I feel great when I'm on paleo or carnivore, but if I switch to a more Mediterranean style diet, some more greens just wreck me. That sounds like mold. And if they're sensitive to food molds, I want to see what else they're getting exposed to. That would be a great time to test. And then, is it the right time? Is this like testing information going to actually impact your treatment plan? That's sometimes where that severity really impacts things. So you're thinking, okay, my patient's sick and I really want to get them better, but you know your standard workup gets most people better. Stick with your standard if there's nothing that stands out at you in terms of the other things we talked about, like no known exposures, no sinusitis, like no reason to suspect mold. You can always go back to it if you do all the right things and they don't get better in your normal time frame. However, if they're really sick, it can be really nice to lead with a mycotoxin panel to just really get that information, either rule it in, rule it out, move on. So it can really accelerate things for that patient. When we think about what kind of testing we want to use for mycotoxins, I get this question, I get asked this all the time by my clinicians when I do my consults. So there's a couple of different ways that you can analyze samples for mycotoxins. What I settled into using in my practice years ago was ELISA rather than mass spec. Those are the two things you can do. So ELISA is going to be known for being highly sensitive. Mass spec is known for being highly specific. So if mass spec says there's an aflatoxin B1 there, you are darn sure there's an aflatoxin B1 there. If ELISA, if you do that, it's going to say there's an aflatoxin. Is it B1, G2, B2? Like you're not necessarily going to know, but you're going to pick up a whole lot more variation of aflatoxin with ELISA. That was important to me because I literally don't care if you have aflatoxin B1 or G2. Like I just want to know if it's there, how high it is, and then I know I need to treat it. And my treatment doesn't vary per mycotoxin type. The best benefit you get from knowing different types of mycotoxin is trying to understand which systems are most likely most impacted. So, for instance, zearalenone is exclusively an endocrine disruptor. It's a really potent xenoestrogen, so potent that chronic exposure induces early puberty. Oh, that. I want to know if my patient has that endocrine disruption. Maybe that's where her hot flashes are coming from. I want to know if we've got increased cancer risk because then they're on green tea for a really long time. But again, I don't care if it's aflatoxin B1 or G2 or whatever. This is much good. I love this picture. So cute. So this is the fun way of thinking about the difference between mass spec and ELISA. So with mass, this is our mycotoxin here. Where's Waldo? We know everything about him, right? He's 6 feet tall, 180 pounds. He's got that weird blue hair, always wears glasses. All right. So we want to find him. ELISA and mass spec are going to find where's Waldo given that information. But the issue is he doesn't always look like that. Sometimes he puts a hat on. Sometimes he takes his glasses off. Maybe instead of wearing a blue striped coat, he switches to a red stripe. ELISA's still going to pick up on that because it's highly sensitive. It's like, hey, this kind of looks like that guy. Mass spec is like, it's not exactly that guy. It's not necessarily going to pick it up. And again, that's where I think the ELISA version of the testing or style of testing is more helpful than mass spec in this situation. So aflatoxin, just to give you guys another visual, this is the more nerdy visual where you actually get to look at chemical compounds. So on the left there, you've got aflatoxin B1, B2, the Gs, the Ms, all sorts of different variations. So yeah, there's only one aflatoxin, but they modify it ever so slightly depending on, so like for instance, B1, do you see that double bond in the top left versus B2? They just got rid of the double bond. Like it's a small modification. But now if you imagine that, I didn't use the most complex example, but those small changes can be enough that you don't pick it up with the mass spec. Then, of course, you also have to think about, is your body metabolizing it? We've got our aflatoxin B1 gets tagged with glutathione, gets changed in the body to an epoxide, and you want to be able to pick up all those different variations of your mycotoxins because we don't exactly know what it's going to end up looking like in the body. And you don't want to miss somebody who's metabolizing fairly well, but it still is creating inflammation, using up resources in their body. So for all those reasons, Eliza's asked for this. Okay. The other thing I absolutely love to do, if I'm going to do a mold panel, I'm generally asking my patient to also check their organic acid. So mycotoxin testing is pretty easy to read. I'm going to show you guys some examples of that when we go into our case reports. The organic acid is really hard to read, but it's so fun. You get so much information out of it. It's very deep in the biochemistry. You have to remember your Krebs cycle, your citric acid cycle, but there's so much you can learn. We can look at detox pathways. We can figure out, oh, how inflamed does this patient look? How dysfunctional is their citric acid cycle? Can they even burn carbohydrates? And so you get some gut markers, you get some neurotransmitters. And so it's a really nice snapshot of the patient's kind of whole body, but at that cellular level. So usually when we do tests, we're looking at systems like, are your kidneys working? Are your adrenals communicating? This is more of what's going on in the mechanics of your cells and like how do we really optimize those? So it's a very different way of evaluating your patient. But when we think about mycotoxins, what they really do is they're damaging you at the cellular level. And so that's where we want to look for those initial dysfunctions. And so that's why I love the combo and I love doing the MOE-Tox panel is because then you get to actually look at all that stuff. So we're going to talk about uncomplicated Carol. This is one of my own patients. I feel like I saw her maybe a year ago when we did all this. She's a 45-year-old female. She calls herself generally, she eats healthy, didn't have a lot of high stress, but she started having all these weird symptoms creeping in, like fatigue and body aches and a lot of headaches. And I quoted her on this, my brain feels dumb. I'm like, oh, that's a nice way to describe brain fog. And so she had a lot of stuff going on. She also came in telling me, I feel like I have mold. Wait, what now? So she had seen a functional medicine provider in our general area like 5-6 years ago. And he initially diagnosed her with mycotoxin poisoning and got her all cleaned up, did genetic testing, was like, hey, look at that. You're really bad at detoxing mold, and got her feeling great. And then she went on her way and she came to see me this time because I think she might have moved. So she came to see me and was like, okay, we should probably treat you for mycotoxins. She's like, no, I think it just feels like mycotoxins, but I don't have any mold. So we should do the normal stuff. Okay. So she had a lot of bloating. As you all know, gut issues cause inflammation. So we decided to treat her gut. We did some food sensitivities, the usual stuff. So her food sensitivities weren't terrible. For sure, she reacted to pork. That was her strongest. And that one actually persisted. So we pulled that out and did maybe some adrenal support, leaky gut kind of stuff. It didn't really make a difference. And that's the sort of patient where you're like, hey, wait a minute, what are we missing? This is when I was like, okay, we need to reevaluate mycotoxins. Nobody else in her family was sick, but we know she's also genetically the most likely to be sick. And kind of the nail in the coffin for her was, I think at like our second or third visit, I put her on a super aggressive mold detox protocol and she felt better afterwards, but she relapsed. I'm like, okay. So this is her mycotoxin panel. And as you can see, when we look at this, what we want to see is first, I always look at the results, like right where it says present versus equivocal. You want to see how many of these are positive. So for her, she had 4 out of the 5 that were positive. That definitely points you more towards, ooh, significant issue. You also want to look at the upper end of the reference range and then compare that to what her actual values were. And so when you're looking at 1.5 times double the upper end of the reference range, well, that's starting to be pretty significant in that patient's picture. This is what I love this test too, because this for her was a classic positive. I'm like, huh? And this was after a round of treatment. So ooh, that's pretty good. The worst I've ever seen, just for record, ochratoxin of 22. Not my own test, but wow, that was wildly positive. But this is what most of your patients are going to look like if they're mycotoxic, and you do a good job picking that up. So then we also did an organic acid on her. And we wanted to see what else can we do to support your body to get things moving. And surprisingly, her organic acid panel looked pretty nice. So a couple things I want to point out to you. So this is only half of your first page. I really want to highlight her citric acid cycle because that's really what we look at for that overall mitochondrial function. We can also look at glycolysis. So you get your carbohydrate markers. We're looking to see if those are moving and how that flow is. On the first page, what I didn't show you guys were her fat to proteins. They both looked really good. There's no point in showing you overcomplicating. But what we're looking for here is in her citric acid cycle, generally we want to see that be between the 30 and the 70th percentile. If we're really tightening it up, 40 to 60 is kind of that like super sweet spot. The second thing we're looking for is everything to be equal. And now I know what you're going to say. What are the colors for if it doesn't correlate? The colors are going to be like your averages. The optimal is what we call the population percentile. So a lot of people are great at citrate, but they bottom out on cystic conjugate. So just because that generally happens doesn't mean that's what you want. Sorry about the color. I know it's frustrating, but there it is. Anyways, so we're looking to see that everything falls right in the middle. And we're going from citrate straight down to cystic conjugate, straight down to isocitrate. So she's got a little fall off there. When you see that fall off, that's an oxidative stress indicator. Oh, okay. The conatase enzymes that function between 3 and 4 and 4 and 5 are very antioxidant dependent. So we see a little bit of inflammation there, but she recovers. And then we can see succinate. That one kind of pops up. And then there's a bigger drop off to fumarate. That's a big issue for her. Between succinate and fumarate, we actually exit the citric acid cycle and we can go down the electron transport chain complex 2. And that's important because the electron transport chain is the main way we generate ATP. And y'all know how important ATP is. So she's got an electron transport chain issue there. That's going to be contributing to her fatigue. It's going to be making it harder for her to recover. The other big finding we saw with her was our lactate was super elevated and her pyruvate was low. She was on a lower carb diet, so I was okay with her pyruvate being that low. Generally, I wouldn't accept that, but I knew she was eating very grain-free, closer to keto. Lactate, however, we don't want that one to be high. It should be equal with pyruvate. On this test, there's a couple things that can do that, but for her, it could be a reflection of issues with the electron transport chain, again, so reinforcing that pattern, but it can also be a hypoxia marker. And we know that mycotoxins can cause hypoxia because they disrupt VEGF or vascular endothelial growth factor secretion. So that was really interesting to see. Kind of your classic things that cause hypoxia. I always think about anemia. I think about sleep apnea, but mold should always be up there. Her detox section was great because I really love this example because we had been working on detox. So I expected to see things a little elevated. So 27 parahydroxyphenolactate, that is a marker for glucuronidation. Glucuronidation is a phase 2 detox process. So we always want to make sure that is working fast enough to keep up with whatever your patient demands are. Orotate is a liver marker. It reflects the urea cycle. So when that's low, we're really worried about sluggish liver. If it's high, like really high, we could be worried about the urea cycle flow. We could worry about DNA damage because orotate eventually goes on to help to repair DNA. We can also then look at our pyroglutamate. Number 29, pyroglutamate. That's a marker for glutathione. This was her after being on a bunch of glutathione. So her marker to 62%, pretty good. On this page, we definitely want to be in the color ranges. So she nailed that one. So that was pretty decent, but we can see that we've been pushing detox. It's upregulated. So what we gathered from the couple sections I showed you that, hey, we got to really support your body with inflammation. We got to give you a lot of ingredients to keep supporting detox rather than stimulating detox. So some of your things are just ingredients that we use. Some things like, for instance, diindolylmethane upregulates all phase 2 enzymes. Upregulation was not indicated here. We can already see she's running full tilt. What we need to do is just support. So what we end up putting together for her was this treatment plan. So we did reinstituted glutathione twice a day, so fairly aggressive dose, binder twice a day. So I always dose that 30 minutes after glutathione. I stole that from Quicksilver Labs. I just think it's a brilliant way to dose it. CoQ10. So I chose CoQ10 for her because we know that's the primary antioxidant for the electron transport chain. And we saw that come through on her test. And I really want to support her energy. And then I gave her a B complex because obviously B complexes work with pretty much everything when we think about mitochondrial health. But a lot of those Bs are also really important for your detox pathways. And we want to just give her ingredients to make those enzymes work better. The B complex I chose has, I want to say 20 milligrams of B6, but then we also reinforce that B6. So she's getting a very healthy dose there to really support that glucuronidation, since that's one of our major phase 2 pathways. Then we added in phase 2 stuff. So you can think about taurine and glycine and those Bs, and there's, all sorts of different things that we need for phase 2. Because phase 2, you have to basically tag something onto whatever toxin you're trying to get rid of. So it uses lots of ingredients. And then I added in grapefruit seed extract because, as we know with mycotoxins, very often there's issues in the microbiome within the gut. And when she was aggravated by wine, I was like, oh, well, there's a food aggravant. I want to treat mycotoxins at the source of the gut as well, or in the gut as well. And I love grapefruit seed extract for that. It was pretty indicated on her test as well. Her mycotoxin test, as you remember, positive for zearalenone, so that potent xenoestrogen. So we had started her on some hormone support. So we were able to modify that and get a really good fit. And the big thing we did was just getting her to stop getting exposed. So it turned out it was her neighbor's house. They either bought it or they were helping the neighbors. They were elderly, helping them clean it out. And she wasn't over there a lot. She knew the house was moldy, but it was her family who were going over there, and they're coming home. They're covered in like construction dust and grime, and that harbors spores, mold spores. And those mold spores were carrying the mycotoxins. And that was enough to get her this sick. So that was pretty wild. And so I just had to train her up on proper protective equipment for everybody, how to clean up the house. And we had her do that and the mold. And this time it actually stuck and she got better and her body stopped hurting and her brain felt sharp again. And that was a super easy case. So tricky case, tricky Tracy. This is not my patient. This is actually a patient that I consult with the doctor pretty regularly. Dr. Paulina, I hope you're watching. She has so many tricky patients that just have everything wrong with her. I don't know what she does to always get the really sick patients, but she really nails it. And this was one that I knew this patient had mycotoxin poisoning. Like I wanted the MOE-Tox right away. And I was like, whoa, what tipped you off there? So we dove into it. I thought it'd be a great learning opportunity for all of us. So this patient is a 35-year-old female, sinusitis since she was in high school, lots of migraines, not related to her menstrual cycle, history of a lot of increasing sensitivity. So starts on a cigarette smoke. Now it's also all smoke. Now she can't handle cats. Then it's perfumes. And we see that expanding list of things that she can't handle. Fungal infections in the nails, lots of skin rashes, issues with weight, major gut issues. But then the other thing that kind of overwhelms you is everything you put in those blue boxes below. Holy cow. She has one of each symptom. So much brain stuff, so much just immune system dysfunction. And so that kind of goes back to, whoa, this patient's pretty darn sick and there's a lot going on. It makes something like mycotoxins more likely. So what Dr. Paulina did is she looked other places for clues. So she looked at her patient's environment and she talked to her about her home. How long you lived there? Oh, my whole life. Okay. Oh, it's your parents' basement that you live in. And it's a 6-year-old home. So that starts to add up points in favor of, ooh, we need to look at mycotoxin poisoning. And then she always asks about the patient's family. What else is going on there? The patient's family, total mess, massive amounts of inflammation. And you'll note that some of those issues like sinusitis and migraines are pretty classic mycotoxin poisoning symptoms. Sister has RA, dad's got leukemia, there's cancer, and leukemia tends to be environmental. Okay, there we go. So that started really putting together that picture of, yep, this is definitely mycotoxins. And then the last thing was the severity. Doctor was like, yeah, she sleeps for 14 hours a day and she has to miss weddings and holiday celebrations. Oh, that's really sick. And so that's why she was like, yep, I knew with mycotoxins, we had to dive right in. Yes, it was the sinusitis and the joint aches and all the other symptoms, but it was those other corroborating factors that really helped her decide what to do in terms of testing. So she ordered the MOE-Tox complete. I don't have an example of the environmental pollutants profile because I didn't want to get too complicated. It's a great little panel if you're worried about your patient getting exposed to parabens and phthalates and plastics and all those and lots of VOCs, but that's a different conversation. So she started her right away on some detox support because she was pretty certain it was mycotoxins. So NAC, B complex. This doc loves DHA for brain inflammation. So on that right away. And then given her patient's history of being on lots of antibiotics, she put her right away on a heavy duty probiotic. And what happened was some good stuff and some bad stuff. So the good stuff, she felt a lot better. Brain fog was greatly reduced, and she actually started working, which was wild. She had no intention of starting to work. So that was a huge win. Energy was way better, and she could actually start driving herself places. Can you imagine being 35 years old and not feeling good enough to drive? And that's wild. So huge win. The patient was stoked, but she looked terrible. So doc was like, oh, her skin was a mess and like her gut's totally tanked. Because yeah, we can't keep doing this. I'm like, probably a good call. We got to slow this down. So that was really wild that even that gentle protocol was enough to make massive improvements. But when you find the right thing, that's usually how it goes, right? And you're like, all that patient needed was a little bit of detox support and things started moving. However, it was too much, too hard, too fast, even though it was super gentle. And so doing her mycotoxins, we can see that if we look at her levels, it's there. It's one of those classic positive, but weaker one, not as bad as we would have expected given the severity of her symptoms. So that was interesting. So again, just to highlight, ochratoxin's positive. She's got the upper reference range is 2. She's a bit above. I think trichophytines were her worst group. So 0.09 is the cutoff, and she's not even 1.5 times over. So it's like, oh, okay. Interesting. The glio was about 1.5 times over, and that's a big neuro. Since like, okay. But when we look at her organic acid, it's like, ugh, I see. Her organic acid is much more dysregulated than the last patient's. And so we can see, starting with her citric acid cycle, looking at that one, her citrate, cisaconate, and isocitrate are all out of what we want them to be. We don't want to be any higher than 7%. When citrate gets really high, it's an oxidative stressor in of itself, so not good. So she'll have good flow. And because all the citric acid, especially the early ones, are backed up, she had nowhere to go with her pyruvate because pyruvate needs to drop into citrate. And then pyruvate backs up into glucose, and that causes more issues, as you can imagine. Citrate also requires glutathione to drop into citrate. So no wonder she's not doing a good job utilizing her carbohydrates that she's intaking. She's probably low on glutathione given how lean she is, which I'll prove to you later. We've got a really high alpha ketoglutarate, massive drop off to succinate. This is the most commonly disrupted step in the citric acid cycle. A lot of cofactors there, B1, 2, 3, calcium, ALA, but not seeing the same electron transport chain issues that the other patient had in the same way. But overall, our cycle is really high. We also see dysregulation in the fatty acid markers. So really high ethylmalonate. That can be a marker for dysbiosis. And it requires B12 to get converted into methylsuccinate. And so she also shows signs of issues converting ethylmalonate to methylsuccinate, maybe needs a little extra B12, definitely might have some actual dysbiosis going on. Her detox section was terrible. This is awful. So 27, 28, and 29, they're all super low. This indicates a phase 1 detox issue. Like she can't even do phase 1. So no wonder she's so sick, even though her levels weren't sky high. She's not removing anything out of her body. So it's all just stewing around in there. And she's not excreting much of it either. Because if you can't do phase 1, you can't excrete. So that was like, oh, yes, this makes so much sense. We were both really excited to see it. So remember, 27, para-hydroxyphenolactate, that's glucuronidation. So B6, it's a huge cofactor. So no wonder she started flaring with that high dose of B6. It was just too much. Orotate, that one is, again, your liver marker, and pyroglutamate, glutathione. She can't make glutathione. If you can't make glutathione, given the same insult, you're going to be more inflamed than somebody who can make glutathione. And so that was really exciting. We also saw other things in our test that were really helpful. So 25 and 26, these two are both inflammatory modulators. And so when they're elevated, we know there's a lot of inflammation going on. So yeah, especially with quinolate being elevated above kynurate, neuroinflammation. That explains her migraines and the anxiety. And so we don't necessarily need to give her something like, so 24, that serotonin breakdown. We don't need to give her 5-HTP. We got to get her brain to stop burning. So we got to quench those flames there. So that's why the DHA works so well. And then her bacterial markers I threw on there as well, because I want to show you guys tricarbalate. So her gut markers are pretty darn good. 32, 33, 32, 33, and 34. 35 kind of bottoms out. That can be indicative of low tryptophan in the diet, which we'll talk about that later. But tricarbalate, that one is a marker for Fusarium mold when it's elevated above everything else like that. And as we know, we can eat mold. And so this patient will likely do better on a low mold diet. So we modded her plan. We talked about this. We slowed down things like, whoa, we're pushing her too hard. We got to slow down on that NAC. We got to slow down on that high dose B6. Let's give her lots of supports. This patient's way more inflamed than the last one we looked at, the first case, the easy case. So we really got to focus on getting things moving for this patient in her body, getting that cell function back up. We selected quercetin to work on her histamine reactions and the breakouts. And because quercetin's a wonderful antioxidant, definitely has impact in the liver. So we love that. Phosphatidylcholine. If you're not using this one, you're probably missing out because it's really popular right now. It does so much to the body. So we wanted to stimulate bile flow to support detox without kind of pushing detox. Hey, let's get off that current burden. But then we also thought about improving membrane fluidity. If you've got an issue with phase 1, those CYP enzymes are embedded in the mitochondrial membrane. So you want to think about, hey, can things get in there? So that membrane fluidity. And then we love it for her brain health and her gut health. So that just hit everything perfectly. Electrolyte blend I didn't write down the exact ingredient, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, like taurine. Hey, that's a phase 2 ingredient. D-ribose, we all know that one for mitochondrial support. So a lot of things to really start supporting her with ingredients and antioxidants. So much more than just electrolytes. So we want to support her citric acid cycle flow. And then the leaky gut formula, that one had bacillus coagulans. You guys, bacillus coagulans has research for reducing or actually breaking down mycotoxins. All the research is done in either livestock or in the soil because that's where all of our mycotoxin research seems to be done. But I think if it works in pig gut, it should work in human pretty well too. So bacillus coagulans and bacillus subtilis both have research for decreasing for actually degrading mycotoxins. So that was the perfect choice for this patient. And then an antioxidant blend. Again, leaning towards mitochondrial support for this patient because we could see her citric acid cycle was slow, but we just really wanted to give her lots of stuff to work on inflammation. So a smidge bit of NAC in that formula, still not equaling to what NAC she was taking daily. And then the ALA, which had come up a bit on her organic acids. So that was that patient. She is still under treatment. She's doing better, but as you can imagine, that's going to be a fall. But that was just, I wanted to demonstrate how even with the most complex patient, doing something like the MOE-Tox panel can give you a really good starting point of, hey, what's the best way to support this patient? Why are they so inflamed? And where might that be coming from between the gut markers and the detox markers and seeing how their mitochondria are functioning? So that's all I have for you guys. So to recap, you got to be thinking about mycotoxins. If you're not thinking about them, you're not going to catch them. You want to do proper testing. You got to be sensitive in your testing. You want to pick up anything that's out there and then putting together a treatment plan. Just make sure that you choose things that are supporting your patient properly and are the right level of aggression.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.